It is funny for me how many people can't get over the fact that I have a black shirt with a black background.
The more people comment on it, the more it makes you want to do it. I can see the contrarian streak in you.
Why is that contrarian?
Well, it's like if people keep commenting on it, it's like, oh, wait a second.
We had our conversation with Shri from PayPal. Were you on that call?
If it was last week, I think I missed it.
No. It was a couple weeks ago. We had this marvelous, elaborate conversation, and so I wrote him a thank you to say thanks for doing this. And he just wrote me back saying it was great to be on the call, but how the heck did you get that set up with a black background?
See?
Wow.
It's notable.
Wow. All it is literally a black sheet with a black t-shirt. How hard can that be?
It's not.
So we have a special relationship between Essilen Research and 7 CTOs. I feel like I have let you into my people
I
spend
feel that way too. And
to spend time with them. How has it been?
It's been great, actually. Just being a fly on the wall in the Slack channel and just listening to people talking to each other and helping each other. It's very gratifying, honestly, because I think that's one of the things, we talked about this a lot, right? As a CTO, it's very kind of an isolating position. And so, yeah, no, it's wonderful.
Well, you're hardly a fly on the wall. I mean, you're quite amazing with your contributions.
I try to be a non-negative contributor. That's my goal. Non-negative is good.
I reflect a lot on that with 7 CTOs as we've grown from 0 to 200. There was a tipping point, I think, when we reached about 70 or 80, where we had just enough people to be able to answer almost every question that comes up.
Mm-hmm.
And so now it's just amazing to see the threads. Almost every single question is getting answered. It's
absolutely. And so many questions where, like, I honestly don't even know what they're talking about. Like, I've never even heard of the acronym. And it's like, this is wonderful, right?
How is it possible, Augustine, that you haven't heard of the acronym? Come on.
I mean, it's just there's so much out there, right? Like,
I was talking to someone about that yesterday because the path that I took to becoming a CTO, or I got on the path because I could solve problems that in technology that other people couldn't. And by other people, I mean my co-founders or business partners, and I'm deriving so much value from that. And it's so hard to shake that in CTO land, where you feel like you have to know everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Driving me nuts.
It's tough, right? Like, people look up to you, and just you feel you need to inhabit the role, and before you know it, you kind of feel like a phony, but then you can't go back, and it's hard.
Yeah, I feel like there needs to be some unspoken agreement between scientific brains that's just like, you know what, it's completely okay if you feel clumsy, you feel inadequate, but just ask and let's figure it out.
That's right.
I wonder if the issue is the fear of comprehension, where the fear is that you will ask something. I mean, that's fine, but that you won't understand the answer. And then you would need to ask all these clarifying questions to the chagrin of this poor person who volunteered to help you.
Yeah, it's sort of this weird position, right? Like, especially if you're a leader and you're asking your team answers to questions, right? Like, it's incredibly strong pressure to not be seen as not knowing, right? Just, it's such a powerful human thing, right?
Yeah. So you're in our forums. You and Paul are leading some discussions. Are there some trends that you're seeing? So with all these, you've just finished the first month, right?
We have, yeah, that's right. And in fact, last night we started looking at the data on the responses to the audits and the surveys. And so, we're going to keep diving into it. The thing that I think I've already identified as an interesting thing is that I want to double check, but right now it looks like people underestimate where they stand in terms of best practices, like release, continuous integration, and that sort of thing. Like they sort of systematically think, oh, we're behind on that, when in fact they're actually doing pretty well. And conversely, the stuff that they think, oh, we're doing pretty well on, like let's say like technical hiring or something like that, they're actually maybe not doing as well as they thought. And so it's the kind of thing where the more you know about something, sort of it's the diminishing returns question. So we're going to dive into that. We're going to get into it in the next sessions, but I think that's an early indicator.
Yeah, and isn't that just so classic about the CTO type, right? It's the so how do you think you stack up? Well, I suck, or I don't understand the pipeline, so therefore I probably am not as good as others. But meanwhile, and I've seen some of those surveys come in, and I'm just really shocked at how many people underrate their best practice when really sometimes they exceed it.
That's right. That's exactly right. It's we'll double check and make sure that that's actually in the data, but that's what it looks like to me right now.
So I had a conversation with someone recently about security, and also this issue around the domain being so, it seems so mutually exclusive almost from the day-to-day production of software and performance management and team management, that you almost delay it to the point where, okay, we'll get to that, because if we take it on too soon, it impedes our ability to deliver software. And I feel like data science is almost in the same space, where it's like, well, we don't have enough data, or we don't have enough, we still have to just solve for A, B, and C before we start getting to the alpha and the omega, So it's, again, as the CTOs lead their teams and their companies through that is a tough one.
Right. It's how much is enough to not kind of foreclose avenues in the near future. How much is enough to do without being sort of so much that you're just kind of under investing in the thing that really matters. It's like that's the job, right? That's making those tough decisions.
How much of what you do, how much of what you're seeing is related to AI and machine learning? Like how important is it really? I mean, if I can write a query in an Excel spreadsheet or design a formula, isn't that fake machine learning?
That's the thing, right? Is machine learning has been around for 50 years. We called it linear regression before, and now we call it machine learning. That's kind of a joke, right? But there's, I think, a kernel of truth to that. Certainly, I think one of the places that people overestimate the value of machine learning is in the product, and actually underestimate the value of machine learning or just data science in general in terms of the process. Like your team, if you're doing software or anything fairly technical, is just producing this incredible data exhaust. Every time somebody checks something in, every time somebody like puts a ticket as complete on Jira or whatever, right? Like this is all this data that is there for you to mine, and it actually can tell you a lot about your process. But we sort of think of the cool, sexy thing as being using AI in our product, and so that's kind of where we naturally gravitate towards.
Yeah, it makes it. I think it makes it easier to understand for the non-technical people, just like cloud made it easier for people to understand what a data center was.
Sure.
My mom asked me the other day, is it literally in the clouds? And when she asked me that, I thought, okay, this is one of those funny moments that people have joked about for 20 years ago. But then she kept rephrasing the question in a way where I was like, I can totally understand the confusion around cloud. Mm-hmm. Where are my Dropbox photos stored?
Right.
Is it in the sky? Or do they have something in the sky?
Yeah, and so my kids asked me exactly the same question, and my answer was just to go to Google Images and show them pictures of data centers, like racks and racks of machines, and like they put data centers in places where electricity is cheap, just like stuff like that, right? It makes it
Exactly.
much more kind of physical and concrete.
It's just like the internet is computers that have been connected by wires.
Right. A series of tubes.
It's a series of tubes. So, in machine learning, in AI, what are you seeing? What should CTOs really be thinking about?
Go ahead. Sorry.
Is it the idea that I have all this data and I have a competitive advantage that I need to mine from my data? Or is it there's a whole new feature set that I should be developing and thinking about in order to facilitate sort of learning? Where are we on this?
So the analogy that I give people that I talk to about this is from South Park. Many years ago, there was an episode of South Park with a group of gnomes called the Underpants Gnomes. And they had a plan for world domination. This is going somewhere, I promise you. Step 1 was to grab the underpants. Step 2, and they had like a little chart on the screen, was big question mark. And step 3 was profit. And so like I just tell people like, look, I feel like you're the underpants gnomes with your data, right? Like get the data, question mark, profit, right? And it's kind of a joke, but it's actually true. And so I always tell people like, look, the number one thing you need to do is just flip the order of those three things, right? Like where is the business value? Where is the profit going to come from? Like at the margin of where you are now, what is the next feature that's going to move the needle? And if that feature or that new product or something happens to require data, that's going to guide your decisions about what to build, what to log, what to keep. I mean, there's trade-offs and cost to everything, right? So it's not like, oh, data, find a way to make it make money for me. It's like that's putting the cart before the horse.
Yes, and so you want the business to drive
For sure.
the data gathering and learning needs.
I think so. I think that's
the only question I have though is as CTOs, you can either store your data on floppy disks or on solid states or on S3 or on bare metal servers. So there are some bets that you make early on.
Sure.
That could either set you up for more or you're sort of dead-ended by your technology. So I'm curious to know if there are things that we should be thinking about on the tech side that could inform what is possible on the business side.
So I would say the number one thing is storage is cheap, right? So just don't throw anything away. Like it just does not cost that much money to store things. I mean, on S3 it actually can cost some money, but whatever, right? Like you can find cheap ways to store things. And I think the cool thing that's happened in the last few years is that you have products out there that explicitly are tasked with bringing your data into one place. And so even if you don't have, say, Snowflake today, you can, as long as you keep things in a reasonably future-proof format, I don't know, even if it's just JSON, CSVs, it doesn't really matter. Someday in the future, you're like, I need a data lake. Okay, fine. Like I'll sign the contract with Snowflake or whoever. Boom, bring it in one place. So yeah, just don't throw anything away. I think is like, don't throw those bits away. You can future-proof yourself pretty well just by doing that, I think.
Yeah, because companies like Snowflake will then sort of instantly make that data valuable.
Right, exactly. And even if it's not Snowflake, like if to the extent that companies have just even a Microsoft account, like Power BI is pretty powerful and it's free for most companies, right? Like you just ingest things and start running reports and just exploring, right?
Have you heard of Treasure Data?
No, I haven't.
Have you heard of Treasure Data?
Oh, now I see.
No, it's also one of these learning by dragging and dropping tools.
Mm-hmm.
Apologies if anyone from Treasure Data is listening, but yeah, it's just there's this huge market now in providing sort of that visibility into your data.
Right. Yeah.
Did you see the GPT-3 stuff?
Yes, I've been following it closely. I've been in online conversations about it. I wrote an email to Tyler Cowen on Marginal Revolution. He republished about it. So yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about it a lot the last few weeks.
So take me through from the moment you saw the story to the moment you saw. I think I saw the video on LinkedIn. Just take me from that story all the way to where you are now.
Sure. So I think I want to start actually 3 years ago when the Vaswani paper, Attention All You Need is All You Need, first came out. It was this idea of kind of attention layers, the architecture that all of these natural language processing systems are built on. Because the dirty little secret about GPT-3 is that it is, in architectural terms, exactly the same as that paper from 3 years ago. It's just all the numbers got significantly bigger.
So can you tell me a bit about that paper?
Sure. So the idea is, it used to be what we thought about as being the right way to do natural language processing is with these things called LSTMs, long-term term memory something whatever. It's escaping me. Embarrassing, really.
It's not, because everyone listening doesn't know what that is either. I also don't know what it is.
But the point is, these things is kind of this idea of, okay, well, take some data, keep some state, and just kind of keep going forward with it. And then later on, we kind of discovered that you could do something else called attention, which is basically telling the network, kind of pay attention to these things when you're looking at this other thing, and sort of finding the relationships in text that way. And then this Attention is All You Need paper came out, where they just threw out all of the LSTM stuff and just said, just do attention. And it got world-class performance on a bunch of stuff, and everybody's like, wow, this is crazy. And the crazy thing is, as we kept making bigger and bigger networks of attention layers, then things just kept getting better and better and better. And so GPT-1 came out a year and a half ago, 2 years ago? 2 years ago now, probably. GPT-2 came out a year ago.
Oh, so you've been following it from GPT-1?
Yeah. And then so GPT-1, and then Microsoft came out with BERT, which is like some kind of variation of it. And then GPT-3 came out. And this was the first one that really crossed over out of kind of AI research or ML research into the broader tech conversation, which I thought was I think that's the most interesting fact, where people were sort of, they were asking it questions, having it complete, questions and that sort of thing. And it felt very human-like. It felt very real. And that's kind of what got maybe VCs interested. And then it's like, okay, well, now we're having this conversation.
So I don't know how much you want to get into this, but I am very curious. When my son was born, I noticed how he was learning language. He was simply he wasn't learning words, he was learning sounds. And he wasn't saying sentences, he was just saying a phonetic sequence of sounds, and that happened to sound like a sentence to me.
Right.
So I was wondering if there was a way. The LSTM is not that, right?
So LSTM is just a way to keep state as you keep processing input, right? So you can imagine it as like a little piece of state that has like a little feedback loop so that its past output becomes its new input. It's kind of how you should think about it. And so yeah, like you need to sort of keep state in your neural network in order to understand context, right? You can't understand language without understanding context, right? And so that's kind of been the goal, is increase how well it understands context.
And so when you say moving to attention model versus that, what are we saying?
So now the way that you sort of pay attention to context is kind of structurally different. It's still sort of the same goal, right? You're sort of going from some text here all the way to some weird internal representation of kind of the semantics of that, what that actually means, so that you can then essentially just predict the future, predict what is the next text that's going to come. And if you can do that, then you can kind of arguably say sensible things. Like if I seed it with a question, what year or who won the World Series in 1999, then like if it has enough context, it will answer. I think it was the Yankees or whatever. Just kind of by the nature of its training. But the funny thing is, like, and I think this is the reason that I think people maybe overestimate the potential of this GPT-3 as it currently stands, is that if you ask it who won the World Series in 2025, it will happily tell you the New York Yankees, right? Like it has no concept of I don't know, right? It's just trying to somehow predict the future of, right?
I'm hoping that if I ask GPT-3 who won the World Series in 1999, it will say to me, the world consists of many continents and many countries. So when you say World Series, which country are you referring to?
So that, I mean, it's a joke, but that is exactly what it cannot do, right? It can't really it doesn't really understand. All it's really doing is kind of pattern matching extremely well.
Do humans understand just because we have a bazillion million of those thingamajigs?
So I think that's the argument, right? That is the debate that is out there in the world right now.
Get ready for a 6-hour-long podcast. 60 hours long conversation.
Don't laugh, but I'm sure you could have a nice conversation with GPT-3 and like 85% of it would be pretty meaningful.
Now, so do you think that's true that the human brain just has a bazillion million of those, and so that's why we understand, or are we getting too meta right now?
I don't think so. I think it's a very valid question. I don't think so. I think the human brain clearly has structures that are dedicated to certain things. Like we have sort of a visual system that is like optimized to learn visual things and whatnot. And I'm quite sure inside somewhere there's a structure that is optimized for storing abstract concepts, which is not really a structure that GPT-3 has, right? It's just kind of an automaton.
So for instance, right now, my brain is using my eyeballs to stare at a rectangular monitor that happens to have a image on it with a rapid sequence of a picture that happens to look like Agustin Lebron. And somehow my brain's not like, what are you doing, dude? You're talking to a screen.
Right.
My brain is like, no, you're talking. Am I talking to the Agustin Lebron right now? I mean, is that a fact? Are you running some sort of Zoom plugin?
Are we all in a computer simulation? It's the natural response to that, right?
That would be GPT-3's sort of answer to all questions when the path dries up.
Yeah.
I just want an AI that can answer questions when I have it. Like Star Trek. Can't I just say, computer, that show I was watching last night, can you just put it back on for me? And then, boom, happening. Yeah. Now I have to go to my Apple remote. I have to turn on. I have to press menu. I have to double click on it's just like, dude, why? Why are we doing this?
Me and a couple friends have talked a lot about what that personal information management system should look like, because I think there's $1 trillion business in there somewhere. I really believe it.
I believe that you have to have the perception that you're speaking into space and that the thing is ever present. I'm not in my watch. I'm not like, hey, Siri. I'm just like, right now, what does LSTM stand for? Boom, have it.
So Neuralace, right? That's Elon Musk's company that's kind of working on this sort of stuff.
I mean, but have you heard him describe it though? I mean, I think that the hole in your head is like this big.
Well, if it's only that big, then I guess it's fine.
Man, that sounded pretty scary. I honestly, again, considering that the internet is a series of tubes, the cloud is a server farm, whatever we just said, really, is Neuralase just going to be freaking wires through the brain that just measures electrons?
I think that's the goal of theirs. Better or worse. What I'm worried about is ad tech for that thing. Honestly,
you're just gonna go buy it. You're just gonna
go like I want that, and I'm buying it.
I want it. I have no idea why, but I want it.
Right.
So GPT-3, you've been following it. You then wrote an email or what?
Yeah. So I mean, I just kind of interacting with a couple of people that have opinions about these things, and it seems like it kind of breaks down between people who think this is a world-changing event, and people who, interestingly, the people who are closest to the technology are the ones pumping the brakes on it the hardest. If you look at OpenAI's, what they've said about it, Sam Altman, Brockman, all these guys, they're like, yeah, it's impressive, but it's not, like, this is not it, right? But it feels like it's it, right? To the human, it feels so close to it.
Yeah, it was quite amazing. It was a very impressive demo.
For sure.
Wow. Well, what does GPT-4 look like?
That's a good question. I think if you read the paper, the GPT-3 paper, the authors pretty clearly state they're at the limits, kind of fundamental limits in being able to train structures like this. If only because it has been given essentially all of the text that humanity has available to give it. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but not a ton. And so, like, how do you train a bigger version of this thing? Like, there's just no text out there to give it anymore.
Now, one idea I had to bring it back to my effort to write a bit of an NLP with my son's birth. I did look into why don't I just take all the possible phonetic combinations ever, whether it makes sense or not, and just have that. And then my question is, in that cloud, in that combination of words, can one have all words and all combinations?
Well, this is the Borges thing, right? The infinite library where all conceivable books have already been written, right? So yeah, I mean, maybe. I think it's starting to get beyond my pay grade, certainly.
No, you've done well. You lost me about 20 minutes ago, so this has been good. So, do you think aliens have done this?
I'm trying to think if this is like a legitimate segue or.
My son, this is an attempt at a segue. My son's 11 years old now, the same one that I referred to earlier. He is convinced that he says to me that it doesn't feel right that there are not aliens or other people on other planets. No, put it this way. He feels like it has to be possible, but it doesn't feel like it is.
Yeah, this is the Fermi Paradox, right? If you run the numbers and you look at the Drake equation, like, really, we're pretty sure there should be a lot of civilizations out there. And so why aren't there any? And this is the thing we've been struggling with for, I don't know, however, 60, 80 years.
So tell me more about that.
Well, so, I mean, if
first explain those two, the Fermi Paradox and the Borges, the Drake equation.
The Drake equation is basically if you multiply, like, the number of stars in let's just say the galaxy, right? The number of stars in the galaxy times how old the galaxy is, times estimates for the probability of life occurring, and estimates for that probability of life turning into multicellular life and then intelligent life, and all these sorts of questions, right? You end up with some crazy high probability or a crazy high number of, like, our best guess for the number of civilizations, interstellar civilizations in the galaxy, right? And yet, as far as we can tell, the number is exactly zero if we don't count ourselves. And so that's the Fermi Paradox. Where is everyone, right? And so it's kind of been a cottage industry for decades now to come up with plausible explanations for why we don't see anyone out there. Where is everyone? And it's just a fascinating thing to think about, right?
Do you think that?
Go ahead.
No, go for it.
No, so for example, there's there's kind of the matrix. We'll call it the simulation hypothesis, right? Which is like eventually our technology gets so good that we just all start just diving into our VR existences, and like, why would we spend energy sending rockets into the galaxy when we could just simulate everything on computers on our planet? That's one plausible explanation.
That the civilization that was supposed to come find us is actually on their lounge chairs watching simulations on themselves doing that.
Watching TikTok videos all day. And it's like, who cares about the universe, man?
That is interesting. And then also, I do think a lot about the fact that we're going to Mars and how we just happen to have this planet that could sort of be terraformed-ish just a couple months away from us.
Yeah.
It doesn't...
Nice little insurance policy, right?
Do you think that's going to happen?
I think my opinion on that varies a lot. I'm very uncertain. There are a lot of compelling arguments to do it, but it is also incredibly, incredibly expensive energy-wise to do it. So I don't know. I'm glad somebody's trying. That is as much as I can say. I'm happy that we're trying things.
Yeah, it does feel like is good for the human spirit to try that.
Yeah, like I try to make a point of doing all the SpaceX launches with my kids. Like I want them to have that feeling of we can do things, big things, crazy things. Just, got to try. I think that's really important.
The SpaceX launches are prolific, especially, I was telling my kids, or I was telling my wife actually, that I'm in an age now where we can get excited. Well, this was a couple of years ago, where we were excited about the Star Wars movies, the Superman movies, rocket launches. I mean, that's like a throwback to when I was 10 years old.
It is. But we need that, right? We need those kind of North Stars, right? Like, or certainly kids do, right?
Yeah, I every time I tell my kids I want to watch a space movie with them, they're always like, they hate watching space movies because it's always about someone who gets lost in space. And I was just thinking that I guess as humans, the distance is such a peculiarity for us to get our heads around, that we creatively create these movies where that distance is, we're trying to reconcile, like, just how does this feel, and that's why we have to keep making movies about people who get lost in space.
Yeah, no, I think that's a pretty insightful way of thinking about it. Like, space is really, really, really big, right? It's like ridiculously large.
Now, can I ask you a question that my son asked me so that I can answer him when we go back, so that I can pretend like I knew the answer?
Let me just get my Google.
Get Google ready. He asked me about what is in between space. Space is it the absence of atmosphere?
I think.
What is space?
It's just emptiness, right? Isn't it?
But that, I guess that was his question. What is the emptiness?
Oh, this is this sort of like quantum mechanics kind of question, right?
Like the God particle stuff, right?
All this stuff, right?
The dark matter stuff.
Right.
And the reason he asked me that was we watched Apollo 13, and again along the theme of humans trying to deal with distance and space. And when Tom Hanks looks out of his window, he sees oxygen escaping into space. Now, where are those oxygen particles?
I mean, they're probably diffused all over the the solar system by now, right? Aren't they?
So it's just, so is space a bunch of lost molecules?
I think it is. Mostly
Wow.
hydrogen by the sounds of it.
I think we did it. Space is lost molecules. Well, why hydrogen?
Well, it's just because it's the most abundant element in the universe.
Thank you. So I'll tell him. What should I tell him?
I like that. I like what you said. Space is lost molecules. I think it's good. It's very poetic. It's good.
Thanks, Augustine. Do you want to tell me about the time you lost hundreds of thousands of dollars with a bonehead trading mistake?
I'd love to.
Do you feel like I've teed it up just right for you, with the
have,
space and AI and?
Yeah. So, yeah, this is easily, it's not even close, like the biggest mistake I've made in my professional career. Well, I don't know, unclear. We'll find out later if what I'm doing now is some kind of big mistake. But whatever. So I was about 5 months into my job as a trader, so we left San Diego.
So you left San Diego to
left
go
San
to-
Diego, pregnant wife, the three of us, well, 2.5 of us. We moved to New York for 3 months and then moved permanently to London to start a job there. And so I was maybe 2 months into my tenure in London, and so I was on the options desk. So there's a guy it was just me and this other guy. He was basically teaching me everything. Like, I didn't know anything about options when I started. And so one of the things that I was kind of tasked with doing was hedging our options position, which means that, you have some kind of book of options, and so markets move and you pick up some kind of risks, sensitivities, and so you need to sort of do some trading to kind of even out your risks, your sensitivities.
And so with options, maybe you can just define it for us.
An option is the right but not the obligation to either purchase or sell stock at a certain price until a certain date. It's kind of like a contract. And so we had these positions on, and my job was to just kind of hedge. And so one of the big options positions we had at the time was options on the DAX index. DAX is the German equities index. The senior guy on my desk, he went off to do some recruiting thing at Cambridge one day, and so my job was to not screw things up. And so the only thing that I was allowed to do was to hedge our DAX exposure, right? And so basically we have these systems and whatnot. So like if stock goes up, or if the DAX goes up, then I have to kind of sell a little bit of DAX futures. And if it goes down, I have to kind of buy some DAX futures. Basically, that was pretty simple, very, very straightforward. And so I was doing that during the morning. And I was kind of like noticing that my trades are kind of larger than I was used to, but it was it was 2008, right? There was kind of crazy times all around. And so, yeah, maybe plausible. And then my counterpart in New York comes in on the video chat, because we had video chats at the time, at like 12:30, and he's like, "Oh, how are things been going? Have you been hedging the DAX?" Yeah. So how much have you bought and sold? And I told him, and he said, seems kind of big. And so I said, well, doing this and this and this. And as we're talking, it dawns on me that when you trade a future, there's a multiplier associated with it. So, for example, the S&P 500 futures, even though the notional number is 3,000, one contract is actually 25 of those. And so in the case of the DAX, it's 5 of those, right? So the multiplier is 5. So every time you hit like buy one contract, sell one contract, you're actually buying and selling 5 times as much as kind of the notional dollar value of that. And so basically...
And why is that?
Historical happenstance. There's all sorts of craziness like that in financial markets.
Okay, now can you, just before we get to sort of what happened, futures, just give me like the 101 here briefly. Options is the right to purchase at a certain price.
Right, but not the obligation.
But not the obligation.
Whereas the future is the right and the obligation.
Oh, the right and the obligation. So can you put that for me in terms of apples and oranges?
Sure. So if you and I, like if the S&P 500 futures are trading at 3,000 right now, and I buy one and you sell one, at the expiration of that future, in a month or 2 months or 3 months or whatever, you and I are going to exchange cash flows at that price. If the S&P 500 went up during that time, then I won and you lost. And if it went down, then you won and I lost. So it's just kind of a bilateral contract.
And
right?
and is this just a form of gambling or what?
No, it's like incredibly economically valuable to be able to very simply exchange risk in this way. Like instead of actually going off and buying 500 stocks every time you sort of want to sort of express a belief about the broader market, you could just buy this product, right? Think of it like an ETF, but before ETFs existed, and with slightly different mechanics in terms of margining and that kind of thing.
Okay, so now an ETF, is that fractions of stock, of shares? No, what's an ETF?
You can imagine an ETF as a bag that is contained of, a bunch of shares, and then you can trade sort of shares of that bag. So
and then what's a mutual fund?
a mutual fund is much the same thing, except it doesn't trade day to day. It only you can only purchase it once a day, or redeem it once a day. So it's not really exchange traded.
So at what point am I going to say to myself, oh, I want to trade on the futures markets?
You could do it today, but probably for a retail trader, it's probably easier to just sort of buy or sell the ETF, like SPY ETF or some other ETF.
And so the ETF is, instead of me hand-picking my collection or portfolio of shares, I am going to buy a share of a handful of shares.
Exactly. Right, in a very specific proportion.
But it's not the I don't set the proportion.
No.
Okay. So then
the index provider does.
Now for futures, can you define for me exchanging risk?
So like let's say for example that let's just say like a pension fund, right? Like you put your money in every month into your retirement fund, and what that retirement fund tells you what they're going to do with their money is they're just going to go off and buy some shares, right? And if the vehicle you put it into is an index fund or ETF or whatever, then it's going to buy sort of that proportion of shares. So who sold it to them? Well, probably somebody like I was, right? A trader, a market maker. And so now I am kind of short all of these shares, so I have this risk, right? Like if stuff goes up, then I lose money. So I want to hedge my risk, and the easiest way to hedge that risk is by buying the future. So now I'm kind of flat. So then somebody sold me that future. Well, it kind of keeps going, but it's kind of the exchanging of risk. That's kind of what financial markets are all about.
And so with futures, you're saying, I believe that the future value of this apple is going to be $3. Mm-hmm. Currently, it's $2.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm saying what to the markets?
I will buy it for $2. Right?
You're buying a bunch of apples for $2 because you believe that when it hits $3, you're going to cash out.
At just at expiration of the futures contract, like in a month or something, I believe the future price will be higher than it is now. Let's say that.
Now,
so I buy it.
Now, how is that different from a limit order?
You can execute futures through a limit order. You can say like, this is the price I'm willing to buy it at. The difference between you should think of the difference between a future and a share of stock as just a future is just a contract between two parties, right? It's like there's nothing physical there. Whereas a share is, at least in principle, a piece of paper that gives you a right to a fraction of a chair, a fraction of a computer. You know what I mean? Like it gives you the right to a physical thing.
So futures are contracts and shares are ownership.
Physical things, exactly.
So what are your thoughts on this war that the shorts are waging on Tesla, and how does that work? Because so first explain what shorting a stock means, and then do you have any sort of opinion on? And by the way, what was the book you wrote?
The Laws of Trading.
Okay, great, everyone. So now you know why I'm asking Augustine all these questions.
I wrote a book all about this.
Everyone listening right now is like, dude, seriously, you can just Google this crap. Why are you wasting our time? I'm speaking to the author of. Okay.
So when you sell a share short, this is kind of the thing that's hard to wrap your head around. Is like, how can I sell something that I don't own? Well, I mean, it's the same way you would sell anything else you don't own. You borrow it from somebody and then you sell it. So that's what you do, right? There are plenty of people that are, like, again, pension funds, right, that just own tons and tons and tons, like trillions of dollars of stock, right? And so they offer their shares to be borrowed. They make a little bit of money on the side from doing that. And so I say, hey, T. Rowe Price, I want to borrow your shares so that I go off and sell them. So somebody buys them from me, and I have sold them without actually owning them. And so obviously if the price goes down, then I buy back the shares that I sold, I return them to T. Rowe Price, and I either made or lost some money.
So isn't that just a Ponzi scheme?
Well, no, very much the opposite. Without short selling, I think you would have no natural incentive to find the right price. Like the Ponzi is from
the Ponzi is without that commitment at the end, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like you always need to return the shares you borrowed.
So I borrow shares. So I take Tesla stock and I'm like, they're going to tank.
Yep.
Okay. So I go and borrow 100 shares from some broker or something.
Sure.
I borrow it at, let's say, for argument's sake, I know it's like let's say $100 just for argument's sake.
You just borrow it, right? Like there's no dollar value at which you borrow it. It's just like, hey, let me borrow these shares and I will pay you, I don't know, some percentage of the value of these shares today, right? Like so, like literally 20 basis points, like 0.2% or something. I will pay you 0.2% to borrow these shares. So that's it. Like I have now borrowed these shares from you. It's like kind of just like paying interest on something that you've borrowed. Like, you borrow money, right?
Okay, so then I sit on that, or is there a term on that?
No, there's no term on it. You just until you return the borrow, you have borrowed them, and so now you have these shares that you've borrowed, and so now you go off and you sell them on the exchange.
Okay.
Now this is turned into an atomic process when you actually do this on your brokerage account, but in principle, that's actually what you're doing.
And do I sell them when they've hit $50? Let's say it goes down to $50.
So you sold them at 50, or when did you sell them?
So I borrowed. Let's say I borrowed them on January 1st.
Sure.
And they were valued at 100. But you're right. You just pay the 0.2%, whatever.
Sure.
It goes down to $50 in June.
Yep.
Now I'm thinking.
So you borrowed and sold them at 100. You borrowed and sold them at 100, right? So like you sold your shares at 100,
okay.
Right?
Okay.
Right? And so now sometime later it goes to 50 and you're like, you know what? I'm going to buy those 100 shares back, right? So you sold those shares for 100. So somebody gave you $10,000, 100 shares at 100. So somebody gave you $10,000 for the shares you sold them, right? And now you're short some shares. And so then sometime later, you buy those shares back, you pay them $5,000 because they're now worth 50, right? So now you have no position in the stock anymore, and you have made $5,000.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you sharing that with me. I still feel like it's just a bit of brain gymnastics.
Yeah, I mean, it would be much easier with a pen and paper, but.
What did you write your book about?
Well, I wrote my book about the mechanics of trading, what I consider kind of the laws of trading. What do great traders think about when they're doing trades? And so, like, law number 1 is know why you're doing a trade before you do it. That's kind of, I would say, the fundamental law of trading, right? And bad answers include because I want to and because I have a feeling. Right? Like these are bad answers.
So can you run me through those laws? Or is it too many?
Well, there's 11 of them. So
can you give me like the top of mind 2 or 3 or 4?
Sure. An edge is something that you know or can do that the marginal participant in the market doesn't or can't. I think that's the number one thing that people don't really understand about trading. It's not a bet on what you think. It's a bet on what you think that everybody else doesn't. Right? That's the thing with markets, right? Like prices are pretty darn efficient. And so whenever you trade, you disagree with the market, with the aggregate wisdom of all of those trillions of dollars. And so you need to have a pretty good story for yourself on why you think you figured something out that the rest of the world has somehow missed. That's what trading is.
That is a tall ask.
It is a pretty tall ask.
So one of those wisdoms could be everyone is selling this stock. I am going to buy it.
But the point is, for every trade that happens, there's a seller and a buyer, right? Like whatever price it's trading at is where half the people kind of disagree with half the people, right? Markets are pretty efficient, I'm telling you. It's tough.
That is crazy. Okay, so is it like poker? So I'm actually playing against someone else.
It's worse than poker. You're not playing against someone else. You're playing against everyone else.
Everyone else.
It's way worse. In poker, you only have to beat, like, at worst, 9 people at your table, and in practice, probably only 1 or 2 people in your hand when you sort of get to select when to play. Financial markets, you're playing against the aggregate wisdom of all of these people.
No, but it sounds impossible.
It's almost impossible.
It sounds suicidal to go and trade.
It is. For 99.99% of people in the world, it is not a good idea.
Is there any reason why we should trade as casual CTO types who earn a living and we want to sort of invest our money in the stock market?
If you derive enjoyment from it, if you derive sort of entertainment value from it, it is significantly cheaper than sports betting. But I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about. Right? Like, you don't have an edge, I'm sorry to say. Like, there's very little that you understand that the army of people who are paid hundreds of $1,000s a year and get massive bonuses to think about this every single day, all day, with incredible technology behind them, haven't figured out. I know, because I was one of those guys.
And so, what is your do you do any crypto trading? And what are your thoughts on that? Pardon?
I do not do any crypto trading.
Do you know anything about that, or do you have any strong thoughts about that?
I think I don't see the economic value of crypto. I see economic value as a store of value for people in countries that have draconian financial regulations. Like, I think it's great for rich Chinese people to take money out of China. But I don't know, man. As a medium of exchange, I don't see it. Personally, I could be totally wrong. I'm sure, I'm sure you're going to get like a lot of hate mail for what I just said. I have no doubt about that, but that's okay.
No, I think we've got a solid 4 or 5 listeners. We're huge in Greenland, so I think we're good. Wow, man. This is too interesting.
I'm enjoying myself. I love having these conversations. So what about you? Like, tell me what how much do you look at financial markets? How much do you do trading and that kind of thing?
Well, I recently downloaded the Cash app from Square, which made it super easy to just clickety-click and trade. Mm-hmm. So I ran a small experiment. So it gives a little summary screen, and then at the bottom of the screen, it just tells you the biggest daily movers. Mm-hmm. And with every single one that went down, I purchased $10. And I was basically, maybe there's a name for people who trade like that, but
mean reversion
trading.
That's right. That's what it's called.
So in my mind, the amounts were small enough, the diversification was large enough, and the urgency was low enough to just do that type of purchase, mm-hmm. and then you just wait for it to come back, mm-hmm. and then you sell it. And then my other rule is if I score 10%, I sell regardless of how I feel. So there's no emotional investment. My question is, can I have a 10% return as an experiment?
Mm-hmm. And how's it going? You knew I was going to ask. Right?
Well, I was hoping maybe you wouldn't. Maybe there's a code between you guys to not ask those questions. I'm surprised. No, okay, so COVID happened and the globe exploded, but I'm surprised at the number of stocks that haven't rebounded. Mm. So just one thing I noticed. So my first iteration on this sort of blind trading, which you called mean reversal.
Mean reversion.
Yeah,
yes.
That's what I said.
As opposed to momentum. Momentum is the opposite bet.
Okay, so the opposite bet, like because I see it doing well, I'm buying, I'm getting in.
Or if I see it going down, I bet that it's going to keep going down.
Yes. So now, what I noticed as my first iteration. So I've had a healthy number of, like you said, for the entertainment value. I've had fun watching how stock plummeted 20% and then rebounded 30% situation. I noticed 2 or 3 of my stocks just plain got delisted. That's how bad it was. And that's when I noticed that if I go and click on the app and I look at the last year and I see that it's been going down, like in general, why would it just go up again? So then I try and avoid purchasing those stocks.
Right. So you're
I'm looking for the
like,
cliffs.
Right.
I'm looking for the cliffs.
Yeah.
That's called double cliff, triple reversal, hockey stick jumping trading.
I'm not familiar with that one. Sounds really technical.
That is a new chapter in your book.
It is.
So how about that as a strategy?
I mean, I would sort of ask you the same question that we were talking about before, right? Like, what have you figured out that the rest of the world hasn't? There might be something.
Well, I think having done this now for about a year, I have noticed an unhealthy number, well, not unhealthy, but there's a fairly large number of stocks that I've purchased that way that are just not coming back.
Mm-hmm.
So you probably need to have a stocks will always come back mindset to do that kind of trading.
Right.
And I guess that is a global markets general. You're just plugged into the global sentiment at that point.
Right. And so, yeah, and that global sentiment is expressed by the price at which things are trading right now. It's kind of the aggregate of the world's opinion about these things.
So are you experimenting with any coding still or not?
Oh,
you
yeah,
code?
For sure, yeah.
What are you coding?
Well, so right now I'm actually, I've got my little GPU box here in the corner. Let me show you. Right down there. And so I'm messing around with some NLP models, some models based on GPT, in fact, to try to figure out, like, if I give it, is getting back to your personal information management thing, right? Like if I read an article, right, I would like to give the machine the article, and for it to sort of spit out 4 or 5 questions about the article that I can sort of quiz myself on a little bit. Because like you read so many things, you just kind of forget them, right? And so if you could somehow figure out a system that sort of abstracts an article into like 4 or 5 interesting questions that you can then sort of quiz yourself on periodically, I feel like you'd retain the information there better. So messing around with that in my spare time.
So you basically give it the article, and now do you for you it's not just a syntactical ask some random question from a random sentence. You're actually trying to understand what the article was about.
Right. Exactly.
It's not like in 1929 was the beginning of the Great Contraction, and then your question is, what year was the Great Contraction? Okay.
Right.
So walk me through how you're doing that.
So while you're trying to start, you're basically fine-tuning enormous models that have already been released, right? So like GPT-3 is an enormous model, like multi-gigabyte model that you basically download, and then you just fine-tune it on your data set, right?
So what is GPT?
I don't quite remember what it stands for, General Processing Text or something, but it is OpenAI's model that does these sorts of things.
Okay. So you download GPT.
Yeah, you download it, and then you set up a training instance to sort of, well, you kind of get your data set and then kind of what kinds of questions you wanted to ask you, and you basically try to fine tune that training so that it does kind of better on your data set, right, than it otherwise naturally would. Yeah, it's tough though.
And is it a CSV file? Is it a JSON file?
It's a JSON file, yeah.
By the way, GPT stands for GUID partition table.
Oh, wow. I think that's right. That's got to be right.
Okay, so you get the JSON file, and are you using Python, or are you using some sort of language?
Yeah, PyTorch inside Python.
PyTorch.
Yeah.
Okay. That's why you were able to jump on the PyTorch question in Slack the other day.
Yeah, maybe.
Or what?
Yeah.
Okay, and PyTorch is just for the
deep learning framework. Well, yeah, it's kind of a tensor processing framework that has a bunch of also kind of cool deep learning-y things that you can do so that you can then sort of train these sorts of models. So TensorFlow is another example of a kind of system that kind of tensor processing system that lets you do that.
So TensorFlow, just tell us what that is.
So, yeah, I mean TensorFlow is a set of libraries and a set of tools that lets you process tensors. And by process, we mean pretty elaborate things. You have sort of highly multidimensional matrices that you want to do operations on. You want to do some automatic differentiation on them. And so that's kind of the lowest level, and you can sort of build up from there to this thing where in 5 lines you're like, take this model, shove it this data, do this amount of training, and then test it on this other data. Like
and
anything else, right?
How's your project going?
Not great, honestly. It's hard. It's hard. It's hard to get it to do sensible things.
Yeah, it's. I think I should go check it out.
It's fun though.
Okay, brother. Well, anything else?
No, I mean, I'm looking forward to the next few months with the various forums that we've talked to. I'm super excited. I've learned so much already about the variety of people in 7 CTOs, and pretty excited to hear. I have no doubt that I'm going to learn at least as much as everybody else will, just in talking to people. There's so many sharp people with so much incredibly deep experience that it's going to be a real learning experience.
I love it, man. I love
sure.
it. And I think our London forum just kicked off. Did you talk to those cats?
Yeah, that's right. We did.
How was that?
Good. It was Pete Hanlon and a couple of other guys there. Incredibly varied experiences there as well, actually. Everything from Thames Water, which is like this massive utility, all the way to, Tiny started kind of just getting off the ground. So that's great.
Okay, brother. Well, I loved this. Essilen Research is lucky to have you and Paul, especially because you guys founded the company.
Not much of a choice.
And hopefully we'll talk soon again.
I hope some of this was usable, I'll tell you.
I think all of it is. I mean, I'm going to publish the raw feed right to YouTube.
All right. Well,
is that unless you want me to?
I'm an open book, so do your worst.
Okay, brother. Thanks for the chat. Okay, cheers. Bye.